Let's take an early look at a crash that occurred Saturday night, July 26th, near Monterey Regional Airport in California. The Baron departed San Carlos Airport near San Francisco at about 10:12 p.m. for the 59-mile flight to Monterey. The aircraft crashed about 4 miles from runway 10, about 200 yards from the beach in Pacific Grove near Monterey. Tragically, this accident claimed the lives of all 3 souls on board, and our sincere condolences go out to the family and friends of those who were lost. We'll examine the publicly available facts about the pilot, the aircraft, the weather, the track data, and then explore what we can learn at this early stage. The pilot was a private pilot with single and multi-engine ratings and an instrument rating, and the FAA registry data shows that the last rating achieved was in February of 2025. He also held a Class 3 medical, which we believe was valid. One social media post we examined from a pilot friend of the Baron pilot claimed that the pilot had been new to the aircraft about 6 months and had been new to IFR about 1 year prior to the accident. And based on our research of the FAA Airman Registry, this information appears to be accurate. So as a new owner of a Baron and a 1-year instrument-rated pilot, this pilot appears to be qualified for this night flight from San Carlos to Monterey. The NTSB will have to assess the pilot's recent currency regarding instrument approaches and night flying. The aircraft was a 1974 Beech B55 Baron, November 8796 Romeo. Our analysis of some online sales ad for this aircraft as recently as March of 2024 showed that the instrument panel appeared to be a stock instrument panel with some upgrades including a Garmin GNS 530, GNS 430, and a Garmin GI 275 multifunction display. By all appearances, that aircraft appears to be IFR capable. What we do not know is if it had a recent IFR certification or if the KFC 200 autopilot was operable. The weather from San Carlos to Monterey shows that the weather at San Carlos, about an hour before actual takeoff time, was VFR, skies clear, 10 miles viz, and winds out of the northwest at about 12 knots. San Carlos underlies the Class B airspace at San Francisco, and based on the winds, we believe the pilot would have taken off to the northwest and turned to the southeast for the flight to Monterey. The weather at Monterey was another story. 30 minutes prior to and 30 minutes after the time of impact, the METAR showed that the weather was 800 or 900 foot overcast, 10 miles visibility under the overcast, and winds out of the west at about 7 knots. The reported winds and weather at Monterey would suggest either a GPS or ILS approach to runway 28 left. The Aviation Weather Center ceiling and visibility chart showed that an air meant for IFR existed over most of the central and northern California coast, with ceilings below 1,000, visibility below 3 miles. This is consistent with what is typically known as a marine layer in the West Coast. Cloud cover also showed an overcast of 600 feet with tops at 2,800 feet in the Bay Area, but the METAR at San Carlos at the time showed sky clear and 10 miles visibility. This chart shows that a clear flight to Monterey, with the exception of the light blue area in the Monterey area, may have been possible with clear skies to the east. Another social media post we analyzed from a local pilot stated that the night before this accident, the cloud layer was thicker than usual at 700 to 900 feet, with ceilings at 2,500 feet, extending from the coastline to the mountain ranges that exist just to the south and east of Monterey Regional Airport. These Aviation Weather Center charts on the night of the accident appear to show a similar marine layer and similar weather conditions on the night of the accident. The flight from San Carlos to Monterey was a 59-mile flight, which would have taken about 23 minutes in a Beechcraft Baron. The flight-aware track shows a direct flight to the southeast with the pilot apparently planning a landing on runway 10. With reported winds at Monterey of 280 at 6, we wonder why the pilot chose to set up for a runway 10 landing with a tailwind. Pilots we spoke with who are familiar with the IFR flying at Monterey say that NorCal approach typically vectors aircraft from the north onto final with a right turn to runway 28, especially with winds out of the west as they were that night. Now that we've reviewed the facts available at this early stage, let's listen to the ATC comms. We were only able to retrieve ATC comms without pilot responses, and some of the audio is a bit scratchy.
Romeo,
After analyzing these comms several times, we wonder if the flight was executed under instrument flight rules or visual flight rules. We know the weather at San Carlos was fairly nice. Certainly supported a VFR departure out of San Carlos at 12 minutes after 10 that Saturday night. However, NorCal Approach never really issued an IFR clearance for an instrument approach into Monterey. In one of the first communications to the pilot, NorCal Approach states that we understand Monterey has low weather, advise intentions. That sounds like the pilot's on a VFR flight or possibly VFR flight following with NorCal Approach. Another communication from NorCal to the pilot stated, altitude your discretion, advise when established inbound. To me, this does not sound like a standard instrument approach clearance from an ATC facility. We would expect communications that sound more like cleared for the ILS runway 10 right approach, cross Zebed at or above 2600, or words to that effect. And the final thing that we analyzed that gives us the impression this flight was conducted under visual flight rules is the communication from NorCal to the pilot asking the pilot if he's going around. As opposed to approach clearance terminated, climb and maintain 2,600 feet, turn left to a certain heading. These would be the communications consistent with an instrument approach clearance and then terminating that approach because the pilot deviated left. One credible source we contacted confirmed that the IFR flight plan for this aircraft was in the system that night, but it had not been activated prior to launch or in flight with NorCal Approach. The NTSB will be able to determine whether this pilot activated the IFR flight plan or not, and conclusively determine if it was conducted under instrument flight rules or visual flight rules. ADSB exchange track data shows that the Baron descended from 2,500 feet as it was maneuvering to a runway 10 right or runway 10 left final. The aircraft descends to 1,575 feet, right about where the final approach fix for the runway 10 approaches exist, and that final approach fix has a minimum altitude of 1,700 feet. ATC issues a low altitude alert at about the time the pilot reaches 1,575 feet, and the Baron continues descending while he begins a left-hand turn. The Baron continues descending and turning left until he's headed westbound and bottoms out at about 900 feet MSL before climbing back up to 1,850 feet while still turning left. ADSB track data shows that the Baron climbed in a left turn to 1,850 feet before entering a tightening left turn at a high rate of descent and a low ground speed, all consistent with a diving spiral right to the point of impact. The NTSB will take the next 18 months or so to thoroughly investigate this accident and publish their probable cause determination. It is important not to speculate about what happened without all the facts. We believe the NTSB will focus their investigation on several key areas. First is, was this flight conducted under instrument flight rules or visual flight rules? Was the pilot current with instrument and night flying requirements per FAR 61.57, which specifically requires for instrument-rated pilots that within the preceding 6 calendar months, the pilot must fly and log 6 instrument approaches, holding procedures and tasks, and intercepting and tracking courses using the navigational electronic systems on board the aircraft. Another area the NTSB will focus on is was the aircraft IFR certified. Did NorCal issue a valid instrument approach clearance that night? And what was the pilot's recent history? It was a late night flight after all. Now that we've reviewed the facts, let's take a look at what we as GA pilots can learn from this accident. The first is that loss of control in flight is responsible for 42% of all fatal GA accidents. But the number 4 cause of fatal accidents is unintentional IMC. Precursors that lead to unintentional IMC might include adequate pre-flight planning, decision-making, and pilot proficiency. The AOPA Air Safety Institute analyzed 15 years of NTSB accident data and learned that 1/3 of all VFR into IMC accidents involve an instrument-rated pilot. As you can see in this chart, a very high percentage of these accidents are fatal. Intentional flight from VFR into IMC is almost never a good option. The reason may be because of lack of proficiency, flying an unequipped aircraft, or a combination of both. So armed with the publicly available facts of this tragic accident, what can you do as a GA pilot? What can we learn from this? First is to take an honest self-assessment of your own personal proficiency. Once you've identified any rusty skills, endeavor to improve those. Fly with a safety pilot, a CFI, maybe a CFII. Practice going from a VFR scan to an IFR scan. And once entering IMC, maintain a vigilant IFR scan with a focus on attitude first, airspeed second, altitude third. And finally, learn about spatial disorientation and how to recognize it. Getting your instrument rating is not an achievement, it's a commitment. We encourage you to visit AOPA Air Safety Institute's webpage for more resources on the topic of instrument flying. I encourage you to look at our Beyond Proficient IFR series or our Focused Flight Review profiles, one of which includes IFR proficiency. You can find the links to these sites below, and we encourage you to leave your comments to this video. Thank you very much.